The wind howled across the wide Texas plains, carrying with it the cry of a newborn that echoed through the old ranch house. Inside, a man sat slumped in a wooden chair, his broad shoulders heavy with grief. His name was John Miller, a rancher known by neighbors as strong, steady, and proud. But now, as he held his tiny daughter in his trembling arms, he felt smaller than he ever had before. His wife Mary, the love of his life, had died in childbirth just a week earlier, leaving behind only the little girl who wailed with hunger in his lap. John rocked the baby, whispering desperate words into the stillness. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I don't know what to do." He had buried his wife with his own hands, and in those long nights since, he had tried everything to keep his daughter fed. He warmed cow's milk on the stove, tried honey water the way old-timers suggested, but nothing worked. The baby cried and cried, her tiny body weakening. John hadn't slept in days, his heart breaking at the helplessness of it all. He was a man who knew how to mend fences, drive cattle, and survive droughts. But when it came to raising a newborn alone, he was drowning. Neighbors lived miles away, and John's pride kept him from sending for help. He told himself he could figure it out, that Mary's spirit would guide him somehow. But on the 7th night, as the baby's cries grew weaker and John sat staring at her with tears blurring his vision, he whispered aloud, "God, please, I don't care about me. Just don't let her die. Send someone, anyone." The storm outside rattled the windows, and for a long moment only silence answered. Then faintly there came a knock at the door. John froze. It was near midnight. No one came calling this far out at such an hour. He laid the baby carefully in her basket and hurried to the door. When he opened it, rain whipped in, and standing there was a woman, drenched from the storm. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, with tired eyes and a shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders. In her arms she held nothing but herself, but her gaze dropped past John to the sound of the crying baby. "I heard," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I heard the little one." John stared, too stunned to speak. The woman hesitated, then lifted her chin with quiet resolve. "My name is Clara. I lost my own baby 2 weeks ago. He didn't make it." Her lips trembled, but she steadied them. "But I still have milk. And if you'll allow me," she looked straight into John's weary eyes, "I can feed her." For a moment John could only gape, his throat tight. Pride, grief, and desperate hope warred inside him. Then he nodded, wordless, and stepped aside. Clara walked in, removing her wet shawl, and with trembling hands she reached for the crying baby. The infant rooted instinctively against her breast, and within moments the cries gave way to soft, rhythmic suckling. The sound filled the room with a peace John hadn't felt in weeks. He collapsed into the chair, covering his face with his hands as tears finally spilled freely. When Clara finished, she held the baby close, humming a lullaby through her own tears. "She's strong," Clara whispered. "She just needed this." That night, something shifted in the ranch house. It wasn't just the baby who had been fed, it was John's spirit too. He looked at Clara and saw not just a stranger, but a mother whose grief mirrored his own, and a woman whose compassion had walked through the storm to answer his prayer. Over the days that followed, Clara returned again and again. Sometimes she stayed the night in the small guest room. Sometimes she left after the baby was fed, but always she came when she was needed. The baby, whom John had named Grace, began to thrive. Her cheeks filled, her cries turned into soft coos, and John saw life return to her tiny body. But it wasn't only Grace who changed. Clara's presence softened the hollow silence of the ranch. She hummed while she rocked Grace, cooked simple meals, and even mended a few of Mary's old quilts. John, who had lived inside his grief like a man buried alive, began to find moments of breath again. One evening, as he watched Clara cradle Grace by the firelight, he said quietly, "You saved her." "You saved us." Clara shook her head. "No, she saved me. Feeding her. It gave my sorrow a place to go. It made me remember that I can still love even after losing my own." Her eyes shimmered with tears, but her smile was gentle. As weeks turned into months, a quiet bond grew between them, not rushed, not forced, but steady as the turning of seasons. Clara continued to nurse Grace until the baby was strong enough for other foods, but by then, she was more than just a wet nurse, she was family. The townsfolk whispered about the strange arrangement at the Miller Ranch. A widowed rancher, a grieving woman, and a baby who tied them together. But John paid no mind to gossip. He knew the truth, that sometimes family isn't born but found in the most unlikely of moments. One spring morning, John walked Clara out to the pasture where the wildflowers bloomed. He stopped beneath the oak tree where he and Mary had once carved their initials, and with quiet reverence he said, "Mary gave me grace, and you gave me the strength to keep her alive. I don't know what the future holds, Clara, but I know I don't want to face it without you." Clara looked at him, her heart catching in her throat. She thought of her lost child, of the nights she had cried herself to sleep with empty arms, and then she looked at Grace, toddling now in the grass, her laughter like sunlight, and she realized her love had not been buried with her baby. It had been waiting, ready to bloom again. She took John's hand and squeezed it. Then let's face it together. Years later, neighbors would tell the story of how John Miller's baby survived against the odds, how a grieving woman found healing through an act of compassion, and how love, though born from tragedy, grew into something stronger than either of them had ever imagined. Grace grew up surrounded not by sorrow, but by a home filled with laughter, resilience, and two parents who had taught her that family is not only what you're given, but also what you choose. And in the quiet of the ranch house, when the wind blew soft through the fields, John would sometimes whisper to his daughter, "You were the answer to my prayer, little one." But so was she. Because on the night he thought all was lost, when his pride and his grief had left him empty, kindness had knocked at his door, and that kindness changed everything.